welcome back to Sleeper Sports Media and the Sleeper Sports Media podcast. Today, I'm going to be joined by Inde Rosen to talk about how both Pennsylvania teams, the Steelers and the Eagles, let us down last weekend. The Steelers on Thursday night with their awful performance against the Patriots, and then the Eagles and their dropping the ball on Sunday night against the Cowboys. Also, in this episode, the Steelers continue to struggle as they refuse to change, and the standard remains the standard. What's that going to do with Mike Tomlin, the head coach of the Steelers, who refuses to change the way that he coaches and directs this team? The Eagles signed Shaq Leonard the same day as the Steelers make a big signing too, possibly. Trace McSorley was signed to the practice squad for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the former Raven, the former Penn State quarterback. I've always been a fan of, as I am a Penn State fan as well. Pickett, Rudolph, and McSorley as the trio I would take over Pickett, Trubisky, and Rudolph. In the press conference, Mike Tomlin did say what determined the outcome of the game Thursday night against the Patriots was that the Steelers didn't score on their turnover and New England did.
But in terms of how the game unfolded, thought the significant difference, they got 7 points off of their turnover. On the short field, we got 0 off of ours. And so that's the difference in the game. And usually it is the turnover component and your ability to support each other on the other side of it, or inability. And that was the difference in the game in terms of the outcome.
No. The outcome of the game was determined by the fact that you let Mitch Trubisky throw the ball 40 yards down the field to Deontay Johnson in double coverage, who's undersized, and didn't run the ball on 4th and 2, which would have set you up to possibly win the game. Joining me now is Philadelphia sports expert who is probably just as disgusted in her team's performance as I am in mine this weekend, Inde Rosen. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Nick. Good to be here.
Not a great weekend for our team on the gridiron. Both the Steelers and the Eagles drop 1. The Eagles drop 3 in prime time. What are your overall thoughts and feels on the outcome of the Eagles game right off the bat?
I mean, what is there to say except for that, right? Just a heavy sigh. A rough game all around, start to finish. I mean, it really at no point in time looked like they were in it, right? Which is almost as crushing as just a last minute defeat when they are in it. They're equally bad to watch. But yeah, it just felt like they got ran over. It felt like the Cowboys wanted it more. It felt like every time the defense would try to do anything to keep them in it, the offense wouldn't be able to produce. It felt like this was the first game, even though we've had our injury lows, some pretty important pieces, especially in our secondary since as early as weeks 3 and 4, this was one of the first weeks it really felt like that was very evident.
The last 2 weeks, the Eagles have seemingly been looking over and picking up what the Steelers have been doing. They've been outscored 75-32 in the last 2 weeks where they've lost twice in a row. How do they get turned around quick and remain on top of the NFC East and the NFC as a whole in the playoff picture?
Absolutely. So one of the things that plagued us in this specific game, not so much last week, was drops. And it did feel like, Devontae Smith, for instance, he's so skinny. When he gets hit hard, you really feel like it's like, wow, I felt that through the TV, right? He's just so slight. And it really did feel like some things were a product of guys not holding on to the ball, and some things were a product of guys really getting smacked, which is going to happen in a divisional rivalry game.
How much did the penalties affect the flow of Sunday night? The Eagles gave up 10 penalties for 95 yards, and that's something that you don't normally see on this team out of the city of brotherly love.
Absolutely. I mean, it is. It's worrisome, but in the same breath as the person who watches them constantly all year and off season, it's not in the same token, right? We have a very clean line on both sides of the ball. It's one of the reasons we are one of the fewer penalized teams in the league, and Jeff Stoutland's not going anywhere. The argument can absolutely be made that a lot, if not majority of the calls in that game were ticky-tacky. They were calls that you would have gotten away with had it been a different officiating crew, had it not been a rivalry game, had it not been, in a prime time.
Is the upcoming game against the Seahawks a must win for this team who could be possibly hitting a wall this late into the season? How are they going to use this to propel them forward into the last couple weeks of this season ahead of the playoffs?
statistically, up until this point of the year, this has been the hardest strength of schedule that any team in the league has had. And they do that, frequently to people who have made it far into the postseason, which the Eagles did last year. So bearing that in mind, after this week, which was our away game in Dallas, which, even with that loss, we're at 10-3. Not still, up at the top of the NFC, right? Even with that, we have now the last 4 games of the year, some of the easiest strength of schedule to close out. So I have all the faith in the world that they'll, continue to hold their own fate in their own hands. Now, with that said, I would have liked to believe in them that they would have gone into Dallas and blown the doors off and said we're taking our fate into our own hands even earlier. But we'll play the Giants again before the end of the year. That's another divisional game if that's even going to matter. But it should be a win, is my point. So, there's a very easy rest of its schedule to come. And if they can't close it out, they don't deserve to make it to the playoffs, because what are we doing at that point?
Hopefully, the Steelers and Eagles can turn their seasons around. I have more faith in the Eagles, though, in them doing that than I do in the Steelers and having any faith in Mitch Trubisky. So, Indy, thank you again for joining me, and I can't wait to have you on next time.
Absolutely. And everybody tune into the PA Sports Hour.
That's right.
That was Inde Rosen, the Philadelphia sports expert and one half of the PA Sports Report podcast, who also joins me and will be coming back soon in the new year as we wrap up this episode 40. As we wrap up episode 48 of the Sleeper Sports Media podcast, we're going to talk about some WWE free agency, potential free agency, future free agency. In June of 2024, the World Heavyweight Champion Seth Rollins' contract and the man, Becky Lynch, both their contracts expire in June. I don't think WWE, TKO, Endeavor, I don't think they're going to waste any time to go and re-sign them and show them that they are two of the most important parts of the entire roster. Renewing the deal for the Visionary, it looks to be one of the top priorities for WWE and Endeavor both, according to a report from Bleacher Report and Fightful Select. Seth Rollins has stated multiple times in multiple different podcast interviews that he has no intentions of going anywhere else, although some fans say, what more does he have to prove in WWE? What more does he have to do in WWE? I do see that part, but I also see the part of him being comfortable and he can possibly negotiate a lesser of a schedule to stay home and be a parent if that's what he wants to do. And Becky Lynch's current deal also being up in June, with her slating to possibly be right at the top of the women's division to face maybe a Rhea Ripley, not in the main event, but she's already main evented WrestleMania, the first woman to ever main event and win the main event of WrestleMania. And that's going to wrap up this episode of the Sleeper Sports Media Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Witosh. Thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, join the Facebook group and page, and I will see you next time.